is here. So I'm an engineer by training, and when I look at things, I like to think in terms of systems. So I divide what I see into elementary components. I look at the forces that are at work between those components, and I try to understand how those forces shape the relationships that exist between those different components. And so when I see a corporation, or the corporation as a phenomenon, what I see is in fact a system with 4 different parties that have obviously very different interests. The executives, the customers, the employees, and the shareholders. And those parties, because they have conflicting interests, have to reach an agreement. They have to settle terms which enable the corporation to function. And the corporation functions if the value it concentrates, the value it creates, the value it captures can be divided between the 4 parties and redistributed to the 4 parties according to the terms of the contract. So obviously, the distribution of power or the balance of power between the parties have evolved throughout time. There were different periods with different institutions and different state of competitions. So in the 60s, or during the decades following World War II, sorry, I'm a bit nervous here. So in the 60s, could I sit there?
Yeah, of course.
Maybe.
Yeah.
You're an impressive audience. So in the 60s, the strongest party was the employees, because the stake for the industrial companies that dominated the economy at the time was to train and retain a skilled workforce and to make sure that that workforce was not too rebellious, that it was efficient along the assembly lines. And so you could observe, well, actually, the executives are a very interesting party because you can track through their behavior which is the strongest party at any moment. And in the 60s, I think that it was obvious that the executives were allied with the employees. Most industrial companies were led by engineers who had risen through the ranks of the workforce. And so there was a strong bond between the workforce and the executives, and that allowed the employees, through their powerful unions, to bargain for a larger share of the value created by the corporation. So higher wages, obviously, but also better social benefits, notably pensions. That balance of power obviously changed from the 1970s onwards, and we all know that. Suddenly, capital became more concentrated, more global, more mobile from one country to another. So it became easier for the shareholders to impose their will over the corporation and to claim a larger share of the value created by the corporation. And that was made at the expense of the employees, who became weaker in the corporate contract. And you could see that looking at the executives one more time. The executives from the 1970s onward were less engineers and more finance people incentivized with stock options to maximize shareholder value. So what we're going through at the moment with the economy getting more digital is we're getting through a new shift in the balance of power within the corporation. And my argument is that today, in the digital economy, the strongest party at the table is not the employees or the shareholders anymore. It's now the customers, because we, consumers in the digital economy, are more demanding than ever. We expect lower prices, we expect an exceptional user experience, we expect shorter delivery times, and we want the companies to constantly innovate at our service to make the experience ever better. And so you can see, tracking the tech executives' behavior, tech executives such as Jeff Bezos, that they've once again shifted their alliance. They're not aligned with the shareholders anymore. As you know, Amazon doesn't even make a profit, and Jeff Bezos writes every year to his shareholder to explain to them that they're not ready to make profit yet. Obviously, tech executives are not really aligned with their workers at Amazon. As you may know, it's extremely hard to work at Amazon, whether you move boxes in the warehouses or you're a white-collar engineer at the Seattle headquarters. It's very hard. No, Jeff Bezos has explained many times that what he stands for is to serve the customers better. He represents the customers in the company's board because nobody's here to advocate for the customer. So this is not entirely new. A corporation submitted to the sheer power of the consumer is not entirely new. There was a precedent, a well-known corporation named Walmart, which was already several decades earlier already dedicated to serving the customer with, as you remember, the baseline, always lower prices, something like that, always. So that was very clear that the priority of Walmart was to serve the customers at the expense of the suppliers' interests, with the many Walmart was very harsh on its suppliers. It was also very harsh on its workers, and that has been documented in that very interesting book that dates back 12 years ago, The Walmart Effect by Charles Fishman. And the Walmart effect is in fact that war that has been triggered by Walmart between the American consumers and all the other parties in the Walmart corporate contracts, most notably the workers who had to suffer to better serve the customers. So I think that the Walmart effect is here to stay, and that in fact in the current digital economy, or what I would call the entrepreneurial age, the Walmart effect will get more and more common and will appear in many, many industries where the customers didn't have the upper hand. So, by the way, this is the garage in which Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak once assembled the first Apple computers in Palo Alto. It's a house that still exists, and that reminds us what the entrepreneurs stand for in this digital economy. They stand for lowering the price. They stand for improving the quality. They stand for serving larger markets with new, more affordable products. They stand for innovating when they encounter obstacles and barriers. And that leads to a world in which, well, when you want lower prices, you'll end up with lower wages. When you constantly innovate, it leads to frequent failure, which means that a lot of jobs will be destroyed in the process. So you can expect the workers to suffer quite a lot in an economy dominated by more entrepreneurial corporations. And to make my point, I'd like to quote Babak Nevi, who's a co-founder of Venture Hacks and of AngelList. He's actually introduced that notion of an entrepreneurial age, and he defines the entrepreneur, as you see, for an entrepreneur, if it's possible to make it better, she must make it better. If it's possible to make it more accessible, she must make it more accessible. If it is impossible to make it better or broader, she innovates. And anyone who attempts to serve a customer at the highest level of quality and scale is an entrepreneur. Anyone who does not is not. So you can see that if our economy is to be dominated by entrepreneurial corporations, those corporations will be dedicated to serve the customers at the highest level of quality and scale, and that will have adverse consequences for the workforce. So what could we expect? I see two scenarios. The first scenario is a constant battle between the consumers and the workers, which will lead our entire economy into a downward spiral where products get cheaper, but the purchasing power of the consumer as a result will go down, and will end up with economic development and growth taking a big hit, and will end up with it will probably mean the end of capitalist prosperity as we know it today. The other more optimistic scenario is that the workers realize that the strongest party at the table is now the consumers. And when you have a strong party in front of you, you can try to weaken it by putting in place institutions such as anti-entrepreneurial regulations or a tax system that makes innovation less harsh on the workers. But the way I see it, it's very difficult for government and unions to impose anti-consumer regulations, because the consumers are so powerful, they're so connected with one another, they can leverage technology to advocate for their interests. And so I don't see restraining the consumers as a good option. The good option, in my view, would be for the workers to seek an alliance with the consumers. When you have a strong party, you can either fight it or try to make an alliance with it to align the interests. And that's exactly, by the way, what happened earlier this year in the US, when there was a lot of progress made on the minimum wage front through an alliance of workers' unions and consumer associations who were brought together to demand a higher minimum wage, and who obtained it from the government in certain states and from large companies, including Walmart. So I'm really looking forward for workers to rediscover the power of organizing, but organizing with a goal that's new in the digital economy, sealing that alliance with the consumers to reach better shared value in an economy that will be dominated more and more by entrepreneurial corporations. So thank you very much.